In this video, I'll walk you through building a live chat application using Python, Flask, and Flask SocketIO. Let's look at a quick demo and you can see what you're going to have finished and built by the end of this video. So I'm going to start by creating a new chat room here by clicking on Create Room. This gives me a 4-digit code for the room. If I copy that and paste this here and then enter a name, something like Joey, and then I go with Join Room, you can see that I joined the room, and on the left-hand side here, it says Joey has entered the room. Now I can start messaging, so I can say something like Tim is the best. Okay, I can send that and then see it comes in here. I can say something like I agree. Obviously, this is happening in live time, and notice that I don't have to refresh the page to see the new messages. Now, if we had additional clients, more people obviously could join the room. I haven't set up any limit, but you could do that if you want to, and you can have other chat rooms happening in parallel with a different message log. One also important thing to note here is that if I refresh the page, what happens is I actually disconnect from the chat room or the socket, and then I'll automatically reconnect, but I'll still have a history of all of the messages because we're saving those. So notice if I refresh here, what happens is it says that I left the room, and then it says that I joined again because I left and rejoined instantly. And then it says here that I've entered the room. And just in terms of the message history, we can see everything that was sent. Now, this is a very cool project. You're going to learn quite a bit about Flask and Flask SocketIO. I will mention that this is not for complete beginners. I am going to assume that you have some Python experience. And if you don't have that, or you're just looking to get better at software engineering and programming in general, then check out my course, programmingexpert.io. And if you're interested in Web3 and blockchain technology, I have another course, Blockchain Expert, which will both be linked in the description. With that said, let's get into the video and learn how to build a live chat room application using Flask, Flask SocketIO, and Python. All right, so I'm here in Visual Studio Code, which is where I'm going to write all of my code. I'm using Python version 3.11, but feel free to use any version that you want. And the first thing we need to do here to get started is install Flask and install Flask SocketIO. So I'm going to copy the command here, pip install Flask, paste that into my terminal and hit enter. And then I will do the same with the second command here, even though I have both of them installed already. Now, if for some reason this pip command does not work for you, I will leave 2 videos on the screen that show you how to fix that command, one for Mac and one for Windows. Okay, so now that we've installed Flask and Flask SocketIO, we're going to start by creating a very basic Flask web server, and then we're going to create our different HTML templates and all the other stuff that's involved. Now, to give you a very quick overview of exactly what we need to do here, we essentially need to use sockets, which are kind of a live way of communicating rather than refreshing the page or saving stuff in a database, to transmit messages between different chat rooms and different clients. So we're going to have what's known as a socket server, which is going to be running on our Flask web server, and then we're going to have different clients, which are really just the web browsers that connect to that server. They're going to send a message to our server. Our server is going to look at what chat room they're inside of, and then it's going to transmit that message to all of the people that are in the same chat room. They're going to be listening for that message on the front end, so in JavaScript, and then they're going to be displaying that on the screen. So it's a super, 10,000 foot view of what we're doing here, but there is a few setup steps involved. So just follow along with me. We're going to get a basic Flask web app kind of set up here, and then we'll do all the socket stuff, which will come after we have kind of the main, boilerplate code written. So the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to say from Flask, and this actually in lowercase, import in uppercase, Flask, and then render template. This is what we're going to do to render the different HTML code that we need. We're then also going to import request, if I could type that properly, session, and then redirect. Next, we're going to say from, and this is Flask underscore SocketIO. We are going to import join underscore room, leave underscore room, send emit, and actually we don't need emit, we just need send, sorry, and then SocketIO with a capital I-O. Then we are going to import random. We're going to use this to generate those random room codes that you saw. And we will say from string import. And then this is going to be, if I could spell this correctly, ASCII underscore and then uppercase, which are all the available characters we can choose from when we are generating a room code. Next, we're going to initialize our Flask application. To do that, we're going to say app is equal to Flask underscore underscore, and then this is name underscore underscore, which is the name of our Python module. Then we need to configure our Flask app. So we're going to say app.config, and then we're going to say our secret underscore key in all capitals is equal to, and you can just type in something random here. Obviously, in a production environment, you would want this to be a more secure key, but in our case, we're just doing development, so it doesn't really matter what we have there. Next, we're going to set up our SocketIO kind of integration. So we're going to say SocketIO is equal to SocketIO, and then we're going to pass our Flask application. And then at the bottom of our program here, we're going to say if underscore underscore name underscore underscore equals underscore underscore main underscore underscore in a string. We're going to say SocketIO dot run our app, and we're going to run this with debug equal to true. Okay, so I know I just wrote a fair amount of code there, but this is the basic setup for any Flask web server or application. If you're not familiar with Flask, this is a lightweight web framework used in Python to generate websites. In our case, we're creating a website, obviously using Flask, and we're implementing all of the socket stuff in our kind of Flask backend. And then all the front-end code you see will be what we write in HTML and JavaScript. Okay, so all this is doing, again, is just kind of initializing everything, setting up our main application. And now if I actually run this code by hitting the play button or typing Python and then the name of my file, which is main.py, you'll see that it starts a development web server here. And unfortunately, my terminal kind of messed that up, so let's rerun it here. And notice that we're running on 127.0.0.1:5000. This is otherwise known as localhost port 5000. So if I go to a web browser and I open this up, you'll see that we actually get some output here. It says not found. The requested URL was not found on the server, and that's because we've yet to create a route, so we don't have anything kind of being returned when we go to this page. But our web server is indeed working and running. One thing to note, since we've put this in debug equals true, that means any change that we make to our web server that does not break any of the code will actually automatically refresh. So we don't need to continually keep rerunning the server, but sometimes you'll see that the server will stop because we do something where it kind of breaks it. In that case, yes, you will need to rerun it. So for right now, I am just going to stop the server by hitting Control-C. And once we get some more code done, we will rerun that, kind of leave it running, and then we can continually check the progress by looking at our Google Chrome window. Okay, fantastic. So the first thing that I want to do here is create the two routes that we're going to have for our website. So the first route is going to be our home page, and that's going to be where we go to when we want to connect to or create a new chat room. And then we will have a room page, which will be where we go to when we want to join the chat room. So to do this, we are going to type @app.root. And for our route, we're going to do / that's just the home page route. And we're going to say methods is equal to, and we're going to put in all capitals here, post and get inside of a list. We then are going to type a function, so define home. And for now, we're going to return render underscore template. We're going to render the home.html template, which I will discuss in a second. So in case you are not familiar with Flask, this is how you set up different routes. You use the decorator syntax, which is the @ symbol, and then app, which is the name of our application. You type .root, and then you put whatever the route's going to be. So in our case, it's just /. If you wanted /home, you would type /home. Now for the methods, these are the allowed methods that can be sent to this route. By default, you just have get, which means you can retrieve whatever this returns. However, I want to have post as well, which allows us to post data to this route because we are going to be posting if we are creating or joining a chat room. We need to kind of send that data back to this route. You'll see why we need that in a minute, but for now, I figured we'd just kind of write in this post and get, data for now. Okay, perfect. So inside of here, we're returning render template home.html. We've yet to create this, but essentially that is going to render a template file, which is really just our HTML code, which will be displayed on the screen. So now we need to actually write a bit of HTML code. So I'm going to make a new folder. It's very important that this folder is in the same directory as your Python file and that you name it exactly as I have here, which is templates. It needs to be plural and it needs to be templates. If you name it anything else, this will not work. And just let me zoom in a little bit here so you guys can see this a bit better. Okay, so name it templates, and then inside of here, we're going to create 3 files. The first one is going to be base.html. The second one is going to be home.html. And the last is going to be room.html. Okay, so we will fill those in a second. We're also going to create one more directory here called static. And inside of static, we're going to place any static assets like our CSS style sheet. So we're going to create a new folder, CSS, and then inside of that folder, we're going to create a style.css file. I'm just setting up these initial files so we don't need to create them later on. We will fill them in a few minutes. So again, you want templates, you want these 3 files, base, home, and room, and then you want a static folder. Make sure it's called static and it's in the same setup that you see here. Another folder called CSS, and then inside of CSS, style.css. If you wanted images or other static assets, then you would put them inside of this static folder. Very important that you have that, otherwise it's not going to work when you try to load stuff like the style sheet. Okay, so now let's go to our base.html file. Now, the way that Flask works when it comes to rendering HTML is that you can actually pass variables directly to the HTML code that you're rendering. So from this render template function, you can pass some variables like chats equals, and then, a list of messages or something along those lines. And you can use something known as the Jenga templating engine inside of your HTML code, which is kind of a variation of your standard HTML, to render kind of content that is served from the server. So you'll see what I mean in a minute, but what we always do, or what we typically do when we're creating a Flask or Django website, is we create a base.html file, which acts as our base template. This is something that's going to be like a generic style for the entire website. And then for our other templates like home and room, we just override parts of the base template so that we can reuse code throughout the entire website without having to rewrite it. So you'll see what I mean in a minute when I start writing our code. But for now, we want to set up a boilerplate HTML document. So I'm going to type HTML:5. For some reason, my extension isn't working. Typically, it gives me an auto-completed document, but I guess I'm just going to have to type it out here. So I'm going to type doctype HTML, and then we're going to go with HTML. We're going to say our language is equal to EN. We're going to end our HTML tag. Okay, perfect. We're then going to create a head tag and end the head tag. Inside of our head tag, we're going to create our meta tags. So we're going to have meta char set is equal to, and then UTF-8. Then we're going to create our title. So we'll just call this chat app for now. Okay, /title. Then we're going to link to our style sheet. So to link to our style sheet, we're going to type link. We'll end the link tag here. We're going to type rel equals style sheet. And then the href for our style sheet is going to be the following. Make sure you type this exactly as I have it. We're going to do 2 sets of curly braces, which indicates a variable in this Jenga templating engine. We're then going to type URL _4, and we're going to grab the URL for the static directory. Now, actually, make sure you do this in single quotation marks. Otherwise, you're going to get an error because you have double quotation marks here, and you would have double inside there if you didn't change them. So make sure it's single quotation marks, sorry. Then you're going to type file name is equal to single quotation marks css/style.css. Okay, so I know that's a fair amount of code there, but the URL for is going to generate the dynamic URL for this static directory. Then we're going to look in the CSS directory, find style.css, and this is the only way we're able to link our style sheet here inside of our HTML document. Okay, next we're going to put a script tag in here, which allows us to use the SocketIO module, which is something in JavaScript. So there's actually a library that we need called SocketIO. It's used in JavaScript, and we're going to use that to communicate with our backend Python web application. So let me find that quickly. The way I can do that is by going to the internet, typing Flask SocketIO. All right, I'm going to go to the getting started documentation, and then notice here that there's some sample code. So we have a CDN, and then we have this kind of script tag, which we'll look at later. For now, I'm going to copy this first script tag. Again, you can find this by just Googling Flask SocketIO or by going to the URL that's on my page. It's fairly easy to find. And then we're going to paste it in the head tag here, okay? If you really want to, I'll zoom out and you guys can copy this exact URL, but I think it's going to be easier if you just go to that website. I'll try to remember to put it in the description, but in case I don't, just go to the page that I have here, okay? You guys can just find it from Google. All right, so now that we have this inside of our head, the next thing we're going to do is create our body tag. So we're going to say body like this, /body, and then inside of the body, we're going to create a div. This is going to have a class name of content, and we're going to end our div. And inside of here, we're going to create something known as a block, which I will discuss in a second. So to create the block, we're going to do our curly braces and then 2% signs, and we're going to type block, and then the name of our block, which is content, and then we're going to end the block by typing %%, and then if we can do this here, end block. For some reason, it keeps messing up everything that I'm typing, but you guys get the idea. Okay, so what is a block? Well, a block is essentially a reusable part of our code that can be overridden. So when I type block content, what that means is that in one of my child templates, which are going to be home and root, I can write this same thing, block content, and anything I put inside of that block will override anything that is currently here. So this allows us to kind of dynamically inject code into this existing HTML template so we no longer need to rewrite this whole HTML document structure, the script tag, the link, etc. So hopefully that makes a bit of sense, but that is why we are writing these blocks. Okay, so now we're going to go to our home template and we're going to start writing some code here. So the first thing we need to do is extend our base template. And the way we do that is we type %% extends, and then make sure you have quotation marks here. We're going to type base.html. Okay, so that means now we are going to inherit all of the code that exists here and be able to override these blocks. So I'm actually going to grab this block. I'm going to write the exact same thing I had before. So block content, end block. And now anything I write here will essentially show up inside of this content div. So now for my page here, all I'm going to have is a form. And on that form, I'm going to have something that says enter your name, create a room, or join a room. Those are going to be the options. And the reason we need this inside of a form is because based on what you press and the input data you have, we need to receive that on our back end and then handle that. So we're going to create a form. We're going to end our form. For the form, we're going to say the method is equal to, and then this is going to be post. This means that whenever we hit the submit button, it's going to send a post request to the route that we are currently on, which will be the home page. Inside of here, I'm going to type h3. I'm going to end my h3 tag, and I'm going to say enter the chat room like that. Just a header. You can obviously change this if you want. Then I'm going to make a few divs here. I am going to use a bit of CSS styling, but I'll try to keep it nice and simple for you guys. For the first div block, I'm going to have the information for entering a name. So I'm going to create a label. And for the label, I'm going to say name : like that. And then let's end our label. Then I'm going to have an input tag, and this is going to be a text input for the name of our user. So we're going to type equal to text. Placeholder is equal to pick a name. We're going to say name is equal to, and then name. Now it's important that you have this because this is what we're going to use to access the value inside of our Flask web server. So whatever you label your inputs or your buttons with the name field, by the way, it's very important that you use name, is what's going to pop up as the key for the data that's in the form data we're going to get when we actually analyze this post request. I know that sounds like a lot and probably is gibberish to some of you, but the name is essentially how we identify this element from Python, so make sure you include name. Okay, so we have name equal to, well, name. Then last thing we're going to have here is value is equal to, and we're going to put inside of double quotation marks or double curly braces, sorry, name. Now, the reason I'm doing this is because we are actually going to pass to this template the name that the user has typed in previously. That's because it's possible for them to make a mistake, during the form submission. If that's the case, I don't want them to lose the input that they had previously, so I'm going to re-inject it by kind of passing it to this template. You'll see what I mean in just a minute. Now, after this div, I'm going to create another div here, and let's end this just to kind of separate our different inputs. For this div, I'm going to have a class name, which is equal to join, and this is going to represent the join button and the text input for the kind of room code that you're going to be joining. So I'm going to have an input field here, and we're going to say type is equal to text, placeholder is equal to room code, name is equal to code, and then same thing, we're going to say value is equal to, and then inside of our curly braces and double quotation marks, we're going to type code. Same explanation here as name. Okay, next we're going to have a button. We're going to say that the type is equal to submit. We're going to say the name of this button, very important again that you have the name here, is equal to create. The class of this button is create, and then we're going to say create a room as the value or the text on the button, and then we'll end our button. Lastly, we're going to add one more button down here, and this button is going to be type equal to submit, name equal to, And this is going to be join. Sorry, I need to actually swap these. So we're going to have this as join and the class here as join. And then this one is going to be create. And actually, I'm going to remove this class because I realized I duplicated it here in the div. Sorry for a bit of confusion there, but I just need to switch around the names. So this one is join and this one is create. And I realized that this now needs to say join a room, not create a room, because that doesn't make any sense. All right. Then we are going to say create a room and then /button. Okay, I think that is better. Perfect. So now we have a base template and we can have a look at, well, what this looks like by running our web server. So to do that, we're going to run our code, python main.py. We're going to go to this URL and notice this is what we get. Now, this is not the best, so it does call for a little bit of CSS styling. To do that, we're going to go to our style.css file and start writing some code. So let's go here to style.css. I will try to keep this fairly basic, but we do need to write a bit of kind of responsive styling here. So actually, apologize, we're going to go back to home, and for our form, we are going to actually give this a class because we're going to need to access that class to do some styling. So the class for our form is going to be the following. Class is equal to buttons. I know that's not really the best thing to name it, but I think that's fine for right now. Okay, so now that we have our class in here, we're going to start writing the CSS. All right, so the first class that we're going to style here is going to be our buttons class, which is really that form. So we're going to say buttons display is equal to flex. The flex direction is column, so that we align our items in a column rather than a row. We're then going to align our items center, and we are going to justify our content center as well. This is probably the easiest way to align things in the middle of the screen. You just go align item center, justify content center, and then you're going to align them center on both the vertical axis and the horizontal axis. Then I'm going to type gap is equal to 10 pixels just to give a 10 pixel gap between my different flex items. And the flex items are going to be the divs and the buttons that I have inside of my form. So if we look here at home.html, we have this element, this element, this element, and this element all inside of here. They're going to get a 10 pixel gap and be aligned in a column. All right, going back to style.css, we also need to style the join div. So we're going to say join, we're going to say display flex like this. We're going to say the flex direction is row, and then we're going to say the width is equal to 100%. Okay, then we're going to say dot create, and let's just quickly go back here to home. And do we have a class for create? We do not have a class for create, so I'm going to say class is equal to create button. So we just want to add a class to this create button because I want to extend its size to make it a bit larger. So we're going to say create dash button, and then this is going to be width, and we're going to make this 100%. And that's actually all we need for this first page styling. So let's now refresh our page and see what we get. All right, so that looks a little bit better, but we can obviously improve this. And I realized that the way we need to improve that is by adding some styling to this content div. So the way that we can do that is we can go here to dot content. And for content, we can say display flex align item center and justify content center. And that should ideally fix our elements. Let's go back here and refresh. And now notice everything kind of gets packed in here, and that is much better. Okay, so I'm not going to explain the CSS too much. Feel free to kind of pause the video and you can copy it in here if you don't already have it. But there you go. That is going to be our home page. Now that we have our home page, we want to handle what happens when you actually press these different buttons. So you'll notice when I press them, what happens is actually a post request is sent to our home root here, but currently we're not doing anything with that post request. So now what we want to do is handle the post request by getting the different form data that's being sent. Now the form data that's being sent is all of our inputs, right? And whatever button we pressed. So just to note here, whatever button you press, the name of that button is actually sent through as form data. So that way we'll know if we pressed the join button or the create button from the same form. So we're going to have to obviously handle that. If we are creating a new room, we're going to want to create that room. If we're joining a room, we're going to want to attempt to join that. So to do this, we need to go to the top of our home function here, and we need to check if the request.method is equal to post. If it is, we're going to do something special. Otherwise, we're just going to render this home template. Now, the reason we can use this is because we imported request. Obviously, the method is the type of request, so either post or get. If it's equal to post, then we need to grab our form data. So to get our form data, we're going to do the following. We're going to start by grabbing our name, and the way we do that is saying request.form.get, and then name. Okay, so we have this attribute.form on our request object that has all of the different named input fields. So it'll have, if we go back here to home, we will have name as well as code, as well as join or create, depending on the button that we pressed. Okay, so we have name, we have code is equal to request.form.get, and then this is going to be code, and then we're going to have join is equal to request.form.get, and then join, and then create is equal to request.form.get, and then create. Now, what I'm going to do for both join and create is I'm going to set the default option here equal to false. Now, if you're not familiar with how the get function works, it's going to attempt to get this out of a dictionary. So the form object is actually a Python dictionary. Now, if you were to just try to access code or name and it didn't exist in the dictionary, you would get an error. We want to avoid that error, so instead we use the safer method, which is .get. What .get will do is attempt to grab the value associated with this key in the dictionary. If that key does not exist, it will return none. Now, if you don't want to return none, instead you want to return something else, you can set the default option, which is what I'm doing here. So now if join doesn't exist, we're going to get false. If create does not exist, we'll get false. If either of them do exist, we'll get the value associated with them. The reason I'm doing this is because join and create are both going to have an empty value. It's just a button, so the button doesn't really have a value, right? It's just giving me the key saying, hey, this button was pressed. It doesn't really associate with anything. So I need to set this to false just so that when I do a check here in a second, we can actually see if we had the join key or if we had the create key in our form. There's other ways to do this, but I figured we can just do this for now. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do here inside of my kind of if statement block that I have is I'm going to check if the user did not pass a name. If they didn't pass a name, I want to give them an error message and tell them that they need to enter a name, because even if they are joining a room or creating a room, it doesn't matter. They need to give me some kind of name, so they need to have that. So I'm going to say if not name, essentially meaning if the name is empty, if they didn't give me a name, whatever, then I'm going to return render template of home.html, but I'm going to pass error equal to, and then I will say, please enter a name. So remember I told you that we can pass data to the template and render it in the template. That's what we're doing here. We're passing an error variable. So now what I can do is I can go to home.html, and inside of my form or outside of my form, doesn't really matter where we want to do this, I can create a UL tag. So this is going to be unordered list, and I'll just do another li tag here. And inside of here, I'm going to put double brackets and then error, which will access that error variable. However, I only want to display this if we actually have an error. So the way I can do that is I can type %%, I can type if error like that, and then I can go down here and I can type %, and then end if. So only if we do have an error, or if the error value is truthy, will we render what that error is. Perfect. So we now have the error handling kind of done. All right, so that's our first check if they don't have a name. The next thing we need to do is we need to see if they are attempting to join a room, because if they're attempting to join a room but they didn't enter a code, then obviously that's an issue. So I'm going to say if join does not equal false and not code, then we're going to do the same thing, except we're going to return render template, please enter a room code. Perfect. Okay. So now at this point, we know that they have a name, and if they are trying to join, they did enter a code. Now what we need to do is figure out what room this user is going to be going into. If they entered a room, then we know the room code, and we need to check if that room actually exists. If they didn't enter a room, then we need to actually generate that room for them. So we're going to say room is equal to code like that. And that's because we're going to grab whatever's inside of this code variable. However, we're going to say if create does not equal false, so if it's not the default option, meaning this key did exist, then what we're going to do is we're going to create a new room for them. So we're going to say room is equal to generate unique underscore code. And we're going to pass 4 here, which is going to be the length. And this is a function that I'm going to write in 1 second that's going to generate a unique code for us. In fact, we can do that now. So let's write a function up here. I'm going to say define generate underscore unique code. We're going to take in the length of the code that we want to generate, and we're going to generate that. However, before I do that, I'm going to say rooms is equal to a dictionary, and this is where we're going to store information about the different rooms that we have, like the code associated with that room, and then any of the messages or people inside of it. The reason we need that is because we need to see if a room exists for a user to be able to join it, and if the room already exists, we obviously don't want to generate a code that's the same as one that exists if we're creating a new one. So here, we'll generate a unique code. To do this, I can say while true, code is equal to an empty string. I can then type 4 underscore in range, and then the length of our code, underscore being an anonymous variable. So rather than having something like I do an underscore because I don't actually care about the iteration count here. Then I'm going to type code plus equals random.choice, and I'm going to choose from my ASCII uppercase characters. This just gives me a list, or actually a string of all of the valid ASCII uppercase characters. I can randomly choose any of those elements, add that to my code, and then after my for loop, after I've generated one of whatever the desired length is, I can say if code is not in rooms. This checks if the code exists as a key in this dictionary. Then I can break, and I can return my code down here. If it did exist, then I wouldn't break, meaning I would regenerate another code. Okay, so there we go. We have generate unique code. That's working. Now that we are generating the unique code, we're going to say rooms at room is equal to, and then we're going to create a dictionary here, which is members. And this is going to be essentially the number of people in the room, which is currently 0. And then we're going to say messages, and this will be all the messages that exist in the room, and this will be a list that we will fill in. So we're creating this room, right? So if they're creating a new room, we're going to create that room by adding it to our rooms dictionary, and we're going to store some data with that. This is kind of our boilerplate starting data. Eventually, we will add and change that. Perfect. Now we're going to say elif code not in rooms, like that. Then we are going to return a redirect, and we're going to say that the room does not exist. Okay, fantastic. Now, the reason why I'm doing this here is because if we determined that they're trying to create a new room, okay, fine, we're going to do this. If this is not the case, if they're not creating a room, then they must be joining a room. And in that case, if they're joining a room and the code that they're trying to join doesn't exist, that room is not existent, then there's an error, right? So we need to tell them what that error is. Now, remember, though, that for all of these different, cases here where we have errors, we still want to persist whatever it was that the user typed in, so the name or the code. We don't want them to have to type that again. So the way that we need to do that is we need to pass along with all of these renders the variables code is equal to code and name is equal to name. The reason we need to do that is because we need to pass it back to the template, because whenever you send a post request, you're essentially refreshing the window. So it's going to get rid of anything that they typed, and then we need to give back to them whatever they typed so we can re-enter that as the value for our input field. So if you look here, right, we have code and we have name, so we need to pass that data back in, which is what we're doing here from our render template function. So for all of these, I'm just going to copy this in. And obviously, we don't need this for this last render template because this is only going to happen if this method was not a post request. Now, there's a few last things I need to do here before I'm finished. On line 44, I'm going to write session room is equal to, and then the room that they're going to be joining. And I'm going to type session name is equal to the username that they typed in. Now, the reason I'm doing this here is because a session is a semi-permanent way to store information about a user. I don't want to do anything like logging in or accounts. It's a bit beyond the scope of this tutorial. So rather than doing kind of advanced authentication, we're going to store data in a session. Again, a session can kind of be described as temporary data that's stored on a server. The session can be manipulated by the server, so we can clear it, we can change the value, and this is a semi-permanent because it will expire at some point in time, yet secure way to store user data. So I have session room is equal to room, so I'm storing the room code that this user is kind of in or is going to be in a second, and then I'm storing their name so that I have access to that now through any other requests that they send me. So to clear your session data, usually you have to do that directly from the server. I think there's some ways from the browser to force your session data to be refreshed, but this is a little bit different than user cookies, okay? I'm not going to get too much into exactly how the session works, but if I say kind of go out of the web browser and come back in like a few minutes later, my session data will still be there. So between different requests, it's stored persistently so that I don't constantly ask the user for a name every single time they refresh the web page. Same with the room code that they're going to be in. Okay, now one thing I want to do here is show you how to clear the session. So actually at the very top here, when we go to the home page, we're going to say session.clear. Now, the reason we're going to clear the session when the user goes to the home page is so that if they type in another room or another name, or they try to navigate after going to the home page, they can't. Ideally, I don't want the user to be able to type in directly the roots like /room/home. I want them to go to the home page, be directed to the chat room, and then be able to leave the chat room and then join another chat room. So it's just kind of good practice here when they go to the home page to clear the session, which is going to delete anything that's inside of it, and then we can go from there. Okay, so last thing we're going to do here, after we determine the room and the name, is we are going to redirect the user to a new page, which is going to be the chat room that they're joining. So we're going to say return redirect, and then URL _for, and this is going to be for room. Now, we haven't written this quite yet, the room root, but this is going to be the name of the function that we're redirecting to. So notice we have redirect, and what else do we have here? Sorry, we don't have URL for, so I need to import URL for, but we have redirect and URL for, which are two functions, which we're using here. And now we're going to define another root, which is app.root. This is going to be /room, and then we're going to say define room. And now we're going to return render template. And the template we're going to render is room.html. Perfect. So that is what we have now. So we're going to redirect to this root, which will then render this room.html page, which will then contain the chat room code. And then we will essentially kind of join the user into the chat room and then start chatting. So this is where we'll start getting into some of the socket code after we write the HTML for this room page, and we kind of test out what we've currently done. So before we go too much further, let's test out what we currently have by rerunning the server. So we're going to go python main.py, and we're going to go here to this root. Okay, so let's open that up. Now I've got to open twice. Since the session is going to persist between different browser tabs, I'm going to open up an incognito window just so that I can show you this with two different sessions, because the incognito session is going to be different than the typical session. Hopefully that's clear, but that's kind of how that works. And also session is another reason why, for example, when you like log into Facebook or you log into Instagram or you go to a website you go to quite often, you don't have to constantly like re-log in. It's because your data is stored in a session. A bunch of other data is stored there too, just to make your experience a bit better. Okay, so let's start by creating a room, and then we'll see if we can join that room. I know we're not really doing that yet, but you'll kind of get a feel for how this input works. So if I try to test out the errors, if I click create room, you can see it renders the error, please enter a name. Join a room, same thing, please enter a name. If I do something like Tim and then I hit join a room, it says please enter a room code, but notice Tim is still here. Now, same thing if I go with like hello and then I go create room, please enter a name, but hello stays. Same with join room. Okay, so let's create a room. So I'm going to go Tim and create room, and then it redirects me to the room page. Nice. Now, we don't know what the code was for this room, so I actually can't join it, which is what I was going to attempt to do. But you can see that at least what we've written so far is working. So we'll deal with kind of that room code in a minute. But for now, I just want to add one kind of guard clause here in our room root, and make it so you can't go to /room unless you've actually kind of done the registrations, like you've entered your name or you've created a room or you've joined one from the home page. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to say room is equal to session.get, and we're going to get room, and we're going to say if room is none, or session.get name is none, or room is not in rooms, then we're going to return redirect URL _4 and then home. Now, the reason I'm doing this is so that you can't just directly go to that /room root. It's only going to work if you first went to this page and you entered your name and you either generated a new room or you joined an existing room. So that's why I'm doing all of these checks here, so that you can't just directly go to this room page. All right, very good. So now that we have the room page root kind of handled and we know how to navigate there, we're going to go to our room.html template, and we're going to start writing kind of the basic code here. We'll have to write a bit of JavaScript code, but we're not going to do all of that this second. For now, I just want to get like a kind of chat window set up as you saw before. And then once we have that, we can kind of add all of the socket code in. So I know the socket stuff is coming later, but we need to set all this stuff up first before the socket stuff actually makes sense. So I'm going to type %% extends and then base.html. Okay, I'm then going to go to %% and then block content. And then I'm going to end my block. So %% end block. Same thing as before, we're going to put all of our code inside of here. So we're going to create a div. Let's end the div too. The class is going to be message -box. We're then going to create a header. So we're going to say h2, and I'm going to say chatroom : and then we're going to put as a variable that will enter into this template room. Now this is just so we know what the room code is so that we could tell other people to join. Then we're going to have another div. We're going to say class is equal to messages, and I think that's fine for now. Actually, we'll go with an ID as well as messages so we can access this from JavaScript. And then I'm going to say /div. Now this is going to be an empty div, but this is where we're going to inject all of our messages that we're getting from our socket server. So we won't have the messages right away when we render the page, but we'll insert them into this div. Next, I'm going to create another div, and this is going to be for our input. So like for our actual message that we're sending. So I'm going to say class is equal to inputs, and inside of here, I'm going to type input. Okay, this is going to be type equal to text, and this is going to be the message box where we're actually typing what we want to send, right? Now I'm just going to say rows is equal to 3, just so that we have some multi-line capability here for this input. I'm going to say placeholder is equal to, and then message, and I'm going to say name is equal to message, and then ID is equal to message, okay? So I know it's pretty repetitive, but we need all of that. And then we're going to create a button. Okay, let's end our button. And for our button, it's going to be type equal to button, although I don't know if we actually need to put that, but I will for now. The name is going to be send. The ID is going to be the send btn. And then we're going to say on click is equal to, and we're going to call a JavaScript function called send message, which we'll write in a second. And then we'll have the button say send. Okay, so we are actually pretty much done the main content we need to have. Lastly, I'm going to add a script tag here. I'm going to say type is equal to text / JavaScript. And then I'm going to have another script tag. Now, the reason I want this is so that the page updates without me having to refresh. To do that, I do need to use JavaScript. And inside of here for now, we're going to say var SocketIO is equal to IO. The reason we can call IO is because we have this CDN library in our base.html. Okay, so that's why we needed that. And then we're going to have our function const send message is equal to an arrow function. If you're not familiar with JavaScript, this is a basic function. This is just another way to create one. These would be the parameters. This is the body of the function. And for now, we'll just say console.log send. Okay, we'll actually fill this in a minute. But for now, I'm just kind of putting this boilerplate so that it doesn't give us an error with this send message function call. Okay, fantastic. So I think that's going to be good for now. The next thing we need to do is do some styling. First, we can obviously have a look at, well, what this looks like. So let's run our code. Let's go to this URL. Let's go Tim and create a room. And there we go. We get chat room. Now, this is not what we want the chat room to look like. But you can see we have our message box. We have send. We have the chat room header. And then there is an empty div that you can't see, which is our messages. But I want to make that larger and have it look as it did in the demo. So how are we going to do that? Well, we're going to go to style.css. And we're going to fill in some of our styles. So the first style we're going to do is message box. This is the longest one, but this is kind of the most stylistic aspect of our website. Obviously, you can make this look better, but I'll give you some basic styling. So we're going to say border color is black. We're going to say the border width is 2 pixels. We're going to say the border style is solid. We're going to say the border radius is 10 pixels. This gives us those kind of rounded corners. We're going to say the background color is equal to, and I'll go with white smoke, just a slightly off white color, just so you get some contrast. I'm going to give this a fixed height of 80 vertical height, which is vertical height of the window. Then I'm going to go display flex. I'm going to go flex direction of column. So we align all of our individual flex items in a column. I'm going to give this a fixed width of 80 VW, which is vertical width. And then I'm going to say align items stretch so that all of our items will stretch to fill their parent so that they take up as much room as possible in terms of the width direction. Okay, fantastic. Now I'm going to say dot messages. I'm going to say overflow dash y is scroll. Now this is that empty div, right? So if we look here, we have this div messages, and I want this to be a fixed height and to be scrollable like you would have in any kind of messaging app, right? You have the bottom part, which is what you're actually sending your messages. It's fixed or kind of glued to the screen, whereas the scrolling part where all the messages are, well, you can scroll it. So I need to kind of set that. Overflow y scroll means I can scroll through any overflow content that I have. I'm then going to say flex 1, which means I'm going to take up a certain size of the screen here. And then I'm going to say width 100%. Okay, lastly, we're going to type dot inputs. For dot inputs, we're going to say padding is 10 pixel. And then we're going to say display flex. And this is the container that has our kind of message text box. And actually, excuse me here, there's a few other things that we need to do that I haven't yet written. So I'm going to do H2 and H4 because we're going to have an H4 header in a second. Actually, are we going to have an H4? No, we're not. We're just going to have an H2. So we'll just do H2. I'm going to say text align center so that goes in the center of the screen. And then I'm going to go pound message, which is the ID of our message box. And I'm just going to say that this is flex 1 so that it will fill as much space as it can in its parent. All right. I think that's all we need. I know I just wrote a lot of CSS there. It is fairly basic CSS, but that will give us some decent styling. So let's reopen our window here. And now let's go Tim, create room. And there you go. We get our chat box window. Obviously, you can make this look better if you want, but I think this is good enough for now. All right, so now that we have all that, let's go back to main.py and let's start handling some of our socket stuff. So really most of the kind of styling pages, root are finished. We need to do all of our socket stuff now. So the way that sockets kind of work is that when you go here to JavaScript and you initialize SocketIO, you're going to directly connect to the socket associated with the server that the kind of website is on. So in this case, we're going to connect to the socket server associated with our Flask website, which will be hosted on localhost. So as soon as we connect, there's an event that is emitted to our backend server called connect. So the first thing we want to do is listen for that connection event. And when that connection event occurs, we want to put the user into the specific room that they're going to be in for the chat room application. So there's all different kinds of stuff you can do here with Flask sockets, right? You can send messages to everybody. You can send message to one individual client, or you can send it to rooms of clients, which is what we're doing in this case. So the way we do this is we type socketio dot on, and then this is going to be connect. Now, the reason I'm doing socketio is because that's what I used as my kind of initialization object for the socketio library. So I have socketio on connect. I'm going to say define, and we're just going to call this connect. Now, inside of connect, we're just going to take one parameter here, auth. We're not going to use this, but it is passed, so just put it here. If you want to print it out and look at it, you can, but it's not really going to have any data for us at this point. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look in the session for the user's room and the user's name. So remember that we know, based on this home root that we wrote here, what room the user should be in and what their name is. We're going to use that room code, and we're going to use that name to determine what actual room to put them in. At this point in time, our rooms are just kind of hard-coded by us, but there's something known as a room in Flask SocketIO, hence join room and leave room. So we need to now kind of connect the rooms that we've written with the rooms in SocketIO. So we're going to say room is equal to session.get and then room, and then we're going to say name is equal to session.get and then code. No, not code. Name. Sorry. Okay. Now we're just going to quickly check to make sure that they do actually have a room and they do have a name. This is to make sure that someone is not attempting to connect to our socket before going through our home page. You don't have to write all of this, but this is just kind of a good measure to ensure we're not going to get any weird errors. So I'm going to say if not room or not name, then simply return. So I don't need to do anything. I'm not going to actually add them into the room. I'm not going to send them a message unless they actually have a room here in their session and they have a name. Lastly, I'm going to say if room, not in rooms. So if they are kind of in a room, right? Like if they have a room in their session, but it's not in the valid rooms, then I'm going to say leave room. This leave room function is from SocketIO, just to make sure, okay, let's get you out of that room, because if you're in one that doesn't exist, well, you need to leave that. And then we're going to send a message here. Actually, we don't need to send a message. Sorry, we're just going to return. I was going to send a message that said this user has left the room, but if the room doesn't exist, then there's no point in having that message. All right. Now, if all of this is not the case, so if we've got through these two if statements, we're going to say join room, and we're going to pass the room code that this user should join. Because at this point, we know the room exists, so we're going to tell SocketIO, put the user inside of this room. Rooms are really just collections of different users that allow us to send messages individually or kind of in a group to all of the people in the same room. Then we're going to send a message using the send function. This is how you kind of emit a socket message to all the people in a specific room. And we're using this send function, right? So we're going to say send, and we're going to send a JSON message that says name is equal to the name, and the message, make sure this is in quotation marks, is equal to has entered the room. Okay, so we're going to have whatever the person's name is, and then this is what we want to show associated with their name. Now, where are we sending this to? Well, we're sending this to all of the people in our room. So we're going to say 2 equals room, and I think that's all we need for right now. Then we're going to say rooms, at room, and then members plus equals 1. And I'm just going to do a little print statement here so that we can kind of debug this a bit better. And I'm going to do an f string and say name joined room, and then whatever the room is. Okay, so we're getting the room code that this user is kind of in. We're getting the name of this user. We're making sure that they actually do have a room and they do have a name. We're also making sure that room exists. If it doesn't, then we'll just make sure they're no longer inside that room. Then we're going to say join room, which kind of puts this user in that socket room, right? Then we are sending a message to the room that says this user with this name just join the room. So everyone knows, okay, they're in here. And we're sending 2 equals room. Now, you can send this to one individual person. You can send this to everybody. There's all kinds of different socket commands and functions you can use. I'll let you look those up from the SocketIO documentation. But in our case, we want to send just to the chat room. So we say 2 equals, and then whatever the room code is. Obviously, we're handling the room codes. SocketIO is taking care of sending to the people we need to send to. Okay, then we go rooms at the room members plus equals 1, just because we're going to keep track of how many people are currently inside of the room. Notice that I only did this once someone actually connected to the socket and joined. I didn't do it from this home root. If I were to say members equals 1 here, or I were to add the user to the room, that would be preemptive because they're not actually in the socket room yet. At this point, when they're on the home page, they haven't connected to the socket server. They're just setting up what room they are about to join. A lot of people make this mistake where they kind of initialize the socket in the wrong place. In our case, we only want to initialize it in the actual chat room page, which is why I've kind of gone through the trouble of doing all of this, is to show you how to properly initialize the socket. All right, so that is our connection route. Now we can actually test this and see if this works for now, because from our room, we are initializing the socket, so we'll automatically connect. Now we can do some stuff in the JavaScript as well to kind of look at the messages. For now, though, I want to look at our server logs when we start running this code and see if the person actually joins the room. We get that kind of print statement when we go through the home page. So let's go here. And just notice right away that I get my different kind of outputs here. So I think you guys can see those, but it doesn't say that the person joined the room yet because, again, I haven't initialized the socket. But now if I go Tim and I create a room, you'll see that it says Tim joined room, and then it gives me the room code. It's only doing that when I go to the room page because that's where I initialize the socket. And you'll see some kind of random messages related to joining the socket, creating the socket, etc. Don't worry about that too much. The point is that I wanted to show you it's saying that I joined. So now the next event we want to handle is leaving the room, and then we'll handle actually sending messages and all of that. Okay, so now we're going to do leaving the room. So we're going to say SocketIO dot on, and then I think this is disconnect. And we're going to say define disconnect. And the same thing here, I want to get the room and the name of the user. So I'm going to say room is equal to that, name is equal to this, and then I'm just going to say leave room, and then have the user leave the room. Next, I'm going to check if the room the user left is in our rooms. Then I'm going to say rooms at members minus equals 1 because someone just left the room. And then I'm going to check if rooms at members is less than or equal to 0. If it is, I'm going to del rooms at room. Now, the reason I'm doing this is because if every single person has left the room, I want to get rid of the room. I don't want to be storing that anymore if no one's in the room. So if everyone leaves, we delete the room. And then if you guys want to talk again, you have to create a new room. That's the point of this little block of code right here. And that's why I'm writing it. Then here, after we have this if statement, we're going to send a message similar to this, except this time it's going to say has left the room. And then we're going to print f string name has left the room. Again, just for debugging so we can see if the user has left. All right, let's run our code and I will kind of explain what's going to happen here. So let's get that a little bigger. Let's go to our 127. Okay, let's create the room. Let's go Tim, create room. Now it says Tim joined the room. Perfect. Notice if I refresh, what happens is it says Tim left the room, and then it brings me back to the home page. Brings me back to the home page because since I left the room when I refreshed, because the socket temporarily disconnected, it deleted the room. The room no longer existed. So when I tried to get in the room again, because it was refreshing that room route, it brought me back to the home page. That was the whole thing I was trying to set up, so that when you refresh, if you're the only person in the room, you go back to the home page because you've kind of deleted the room because you've temporarily left it. Now, if we do the following, so if I set up an incognito window and I go again to this case, let's create a room. So let's go name, create room. Now, what is the code? It is MSPS. So now let's try to join this. MSPS, and I go with Joey, and I go join room. It brings me into the room. So that works. Now, if I refresh, it doesn't delete the room and nothing breaks because we have more than one person currently in the room. Whereas if I left the room, so if I do this and then I refresh, now it kicks me out because I was the only person in the room. So hopefully you guys appreciate the kind of complexity here and attention to detail with doing all of that. But that's why I wanted to show you everything that we just did. So again, if you only have one person and you refresh or you leave the room, you close the browser tab, then you're going to be kicked out and the room will be deleted. If more than one person is currently in there, then it's fine. You can rejoin the room instantly when you refresh. So refreshes, you leave, you reconnect, and then you're fine. And if we look at our logs here, you can see that we have, there's kind of quite a bit going here, but Joey has left the room. Tim has left the room. Joey has left the room. Oh, sorry. Joey joined the room. Joey has left the room. Tim has left the room. Joey has left the room. Okay, so it kind of shows you joining, leaving, etc. Joey joined. Joey left. Joey joined. Joey left. All right. Sorry, that was a bit of a mouthful. Okay, so now we have the connecting and disconnecting. Now what we want to do is actually handle these send messages in our HTML file. So we're going to go back to room, and this is where we're going to listen for these different socket events. So in JavaScript, we're going to listen for those events which are being emitted by our socket server, and we are going to handle them and kind of print out a message. All right, so let's go inside of our script tag here, because this is all going to be JavaScript, and we're going to start by getting the location where we want to insert our messages. So we're going to say const messages is equal to document.getElement by ID, and this is going to be messages accessing this div here. Okay, then we're going to create a function. I'm going to say const create message is equal to, I'm going to take a name and the actual message, and I'm going to return here some code that is essentially going to be the HTML equivalent of a message that I want to add into this messages div. So I'm going to say const content is equal to, I'm going to use backticks here, which are right below the escape character, at least on most keyboards. And I'm going to type HTML code inside of here. So I'm going to say div/div. Inside of our div, we are going to have a span. Okay. I'm going to say /span. Inside of the span, we're going to have a strong tag. And then we're going to put inside of a special variable here, which is $, and then curly braces, the name. We're then going to go /strong. We're then going to have a colon, and then we're going to put a $, special variable, and the message. Now I'm going to do something else, but for now, you can see that we have a div. The div contains a span. The span contains our name and our message. Now outside of the span, we're going to have another span. This is going to be class equal to muted. We're going to end the span tag. And inside, we're going to put the current JavaScript date. So to do that, we're going to go $, new, date, like that, .to, and then locale, like this, string. Now, there is a better way to do what I'm doing here. I'm essentially just saying anytime a message is received, the time it's received at, just put that on the screen. The issue with this approach is that we're not saving when the original message was actually sent. We're just handling when it was received on our end, which is a bit misleading because when we refresh the page, for example, and get older messages, it's going to say all of the older messages were received at the time we refresh the page, which is not really true, but I'm just trying to keep this simple for this example. So really take this more as, okay, you know, this is how you would like style a date element, then this is the best way to store the date of the message. If we really wanted to store the date of the message, we would probably do that on the server, and then we would read the date of the message and insert it here. But I don't want to deal with Python date libraries at the moment, so we're just going to have it inside of here. Hopefully that makes a bit of sense what I'm doing, but I'm just putting the date that this message was received so that you have kind of like what the message was, who sent it, and then like kind of a fake date of, you know, okay, we just got the message at this time. So it works if you're connected the entire time, but if you come like, you know, partway through the room, or you come like you refresh the page, it's going to give you the wrong date. All right, so we have that. The only thing I need to do now is just for my div, I'm going to say class is equal to text. And I think that's all I need for my actual content. Then I'm going to say messages.inner HTML plus equals content, like that. So I'm just creating the content that I want to enter inside of this div, right? So there you go. We have our create message function. Now, inside of a special handler here, I'm going to say SocketIO dot on, and I think I called it SocketIO. Yes, I did. And we're going to say message. Now, this is the event that we're listening for. This means that the server transmitted a message. So we're listening for the message event. And then we're going to have a callback function here, which is data. and then we have the body of our function. Now inside of this function, we're going to say create message, and we are going to say data.name and data.msg, or .message, sorry. Okay, so let's just kind of recap why this is going to work. So we're listening for a message event, which will be transmitted from our Python Flask socket server. That's going to contain data. Data is going to have whatever we sent in the message. So if you look here, we have our name and we have our message. So that's why I'm using the fields name and message, because I know that's on my data or on the payload that's being sent here to JavaScript. I then call the create message function, which does exactly what it says. It creates a message for us inside of that message div. Again, there's other ways to go about doing this. I'm just trying to keep it simple for this video. All right, so that is actually it for listening to messages. So at this point, we should be able to see users joining and leaving the room, and then we just need to handle actually sending messages, which I'll show you in a second. So is our server still running? It looks like it is. So let's open up 2 windows, and let's attempt to see if this is going to work. So let's open this up. Okay, let's go Tim, create room. Notice that right away, I get Tim has entered the room, and then it tells me the date. We'll style this in a second, don't worry. And the reason I get this immediately is because I initialize the socket, and then once the socket's initialized, it sends that connection event to my server. The connection event then sends to everyone in the chat room that I have entered the chat room, so I end up printing that out. There's ways where we cannot show this message if you don't want to, but I think it's fine to show that you've joined the room. Now, over here, we're going to say Joey, and we're going to enter the room, which has the code of KDLK. We'll also pass that code over here in a second, but for now, KDLK. Let's join, and then notice it says Joey has entered the room. Now, if Joey leaves the room, it says Joey has left. Perfect. So we're getting kind of a good ways through this. We're actually almost finished now. All right, so first thing to do here as like a slight fix, let's go to our room root, and let's pass the code equal to the room. Okay, so that we actually know now on our web page what the room code is. Okay, that's the first thing. Next, we're going to go to our HTML, or our JavaScript actually, and we're now going to handle this send message function. For the send message function, we need to get the message that the user sent. So we're going to say const message is equal to document.getElement by ID message. Remember, we have our message text box right here with ID message, okay? Then we're going to say if the message.value is equal to an empty string, we're simply going to return, because I don't want to send an empty message. They have to type something. If they don't have an empty message, I'm going to say SocketIO.emit. I'm going to emit the event, which is message, okay? So this is a special event name. You can call this whatever you want. In my case, I'm calling it message. You could call it send. You could call it new text. You can come up with different names and listen for different events. We're only going to use this one event, which is message, but come up with any event name you want and listen for different events if you're doing different things with the socket, right? That's how you get more complicated. Then we're going to pass as a payload here, data message.value, okay, as JSON data. That's what we're sending. And message.value is going to be, well, the value of whatever is inside of our text box. Then we're just going to say message.value is equal to an empty string to just clear whatever it was that we typed so that it kind of gets rid of it. Okay, fantastic. So now we'll be able to send messages. Actually, not quite close, but this will allow us to send, but we now need to receive the message from our server and then send it to everyone in the room. So again, what's kind of happening here is we're connected to the server. We're not connected to all of the other individual peers. The peers in our room, the other clients, are connected to the server as well. We're not directly connected to them. It's a bit weird, but our main communication point comes from the server. So we're going to send this message to the server, and then the server is going to transmit that message out back to all of us. So now on the server, we're going to say at SocketIO.onMessage. We're just going to call this define message like this. And now we're going to handle that message and essentially retransmit it back to everyone else. So for the message, we are going to say data as our payload here. We're going to say room is equal to session.get room. We need to know the room this user is in that is sending us this message. we're going to say if room not in rooms, then return. So if for some reason someone's sending us a message, but they're in a room that doesn't exist, we don't care. We're just going to exit out. Otherwise, we're going to say the content of the message we want to send is going to be name is equal to session.get name. And then message is equal to data, and then data like that, which is our message. Let me just make sure that's true. Yeah, so we have data, which is all of this. Then we have the key data, which is this. Okay, so that's what we're accessing when we go data, data, and data is our parameter here, right? So that's our content that we now want to send. So we're now going to say send content to the room. And then we're going to say rooms at room messages dot append, and then we're going to append this content. And this is where I was saying if you want to store the date of the message when it was actually sent, you would do that here on the server so that you have that now stored in your rooms. Really, I should have done that, but I didn't. So forgive me, take it as kind of homework to try to do that on your own. Then I'm going to say print f string, and I'm just going to go with session.get name said colon, and then we'll do another f string. It's going to be data, which is what they sent, but make sure I do this in single quotation marks, and same here so that I don't get an error with my f strings. Okay. So I'm just printing so we have some kind of logs here when we're debugging. Again, all we're really doing is we're getting the room that the user is in. We're generating the content we want to send, which is whatever the user's name is, and whatever the message is, which is data coming from the payload. We're then going to send that to everyone who is in the room. Hence why we need to do this on the server, because we need to know everyone that's inside of the room, and we need to know what room it is. Then we're going to go to our rooms, and we're going to actually add whatever message was sent so that we have a history of all the messages in this room. Note that if the server restarts, you're going to lose that history because we're storing this in RAM. If you wanted to, you could store it in a database, but I'm not worrying about that for this project. Okay, that's all we need for the server, actually. And now that we have that, let's go to room.html, and let's see if this works. So let's run our code. All right, let's load this up. Let's copy. Let's go to incognito. Okay, let's create a room. So Tim, create room. For some reason, it's not telling me the room. Okay, why is that the case? Let's have a quick look here. We used room, not code. So let's just change that to be code so that it matches. Now, if we refresh, Tim, create room, gives us the room. Okay, perfect. Now let's join this room. So let's copy it and join. Okay, let's go with Joey, join the room. And there we go, Tim, Joey. Let's send a message. Hey, and looks like sending is not working. So let's go back to our HTML. I have on click. Is it on click or is it on press? That is the question that I always forget. Let me look at my cheat sheet here. Looks like it is on click. Is our function called send message? It is called send message, which means we must have some kind of JavaScript error here. So let's see what our error is by going here. Okay, inspect, and we got an error. It says uncaught reference message is not defined in send message. Const message if message.value. So the issue is we have 3 S's, not 2. Okay, so let's fix that. And let's go back here and refresh. And now let's send a message. And notice it shows up over here. Okay, and then we'll say hello. And it's because I didn't refresh this one. So let's go here and go hello. And it pops up over here. And then Tim. And it is working. So all of our socket stuff is actually working. The last thing we need to do here is get the message history. Because as you see, when I refresh, I lose all of the history. And I want to maintain all of the message history. So the way to do that is to send all of the messages associated with the room to that room when we are rendering it. So we're going to go back to main.py. We're going to go to our room root here. And now we're simply going to say messages is equal to, and this is going to be rooms, room, and then messages like that. So that's going to give us access to all of the messages in the variable messages. Remember, our messages are kind of like JSON format or Python dictionary format. So now we're going to go to room.html. And what I'm going to do is going to seem a bit weird here, but I'm going to create another script tag kind of inside of a for loop. So I'm going to write a for loop, so %% for, and I'm going to say for MSG in messages. This is a Jenga for loop. I'm going to go %% and end for. Again, this is the variable we're passing in. And now I'm going to call the create message function from a script tag. So I'm going to go script /script. I'm going to go type equals text /JavaScript like that. And then we're going to call the create message function. And we're going to pass as our first variable message.name and as our second variable message.message. Okay, let me explain why this works. What I want to do is I just want to dynamically keep calling this create message function for every message that I have in my message history. So I create a for loop to loop through all of my messages. There's not really an easy way to call the function other than to do what I just did here. So I create a script tag, and then inside the script tag, I call create message. However, notice I'm doing this outside of all of my divs, and I'm doing it beneath this script tag because this function needs to be defined before I can call it. So that's why I'm doing it. Now, in terms of accessing the data here, I need to access msg.name and message, which are my dictionary properties, inside of my double curly braces, but I need to put them in a string. If I don't put them in a string, I'm going to get an error because they're not a string type. They're just like raw text. So I have to wrap them in a string when I'm using them inside of my JavaScript. I know it's a bit clunky. That's just kind of how Jenga works. But now you'll see that I will load all of my message history whenever I go into the room. Before we test that, though, let's quickly just style the remaining elements that we haven't styled. So text and muted. Let's go to style.css and let's style that. So for text, we're going to say .text. We're going to say display flex. This is because I want to push the date away from the main text content. We're going to say the flex direction is row. We're going to say align items center. I'm going to say justify content space between, which just pushes this to it essentially pushes the elements from the left and right side directly to the left and right side. So it pushes them as far apart as possible. That's what space between does. Then I'm going to say padding left 10 pixels and padding right 10 pixels so that I have a bit of space between the border. And then I'm going to go .muted, and this is going to be font size. We'll make this 10 pixels, and the color can be dark gray. Okay, so that's the last styling that we need. Let's rerun our code, and let's give this a final test. So 127, copy, paste. Okay, pick nickname, Tim, great room. All right, notice our styling looks a lot better here. Obviously, you can change it if you want. Let's go here and go with Joey and join the room. Okay, now let's go. Hello world. All right. Hi. Yes. Okay, you can see our messages. Now let me refresh. And look, I get all of my messages. Now, the only thing we're losing is has entered the room and has left the room. We can save that too if we want, but I figured it wasn't valuable to save that because it's just kind of like a joining, leaving event, which we don't really care about. So you get the entire message history, plus you get whatever the new message was, like has entered the room. Now, notice the dates are not correct because it's just whenever I refreshed is when I get the new date. So that's why I'm saying if you wanted to store the date on the server, you could do that, and that would be a bit better. Anyways, that completes the project. Everything is finished. We've created a live chat room using Flask, Python, and sockets, and I hope that you have enjoyed and learned a lot. There's obviously a bunch more you could do to make this project better, but I think this is a really great start for creating a live chat room. We did this in under 90 minutes, which is pretty impressive, and if you were able to finish this entire project, I applaud you. This is not the easiest thing in the world. I know it's a bit complicated, but I hope that I was able to kind of simplify it for you and make it something that was attainable. All of this code will be available on GitHub from the link in the description. As a reminder, check out my course, Programming Expert and Blockchain Expert, from the link in the description. If you enjoyed, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and I will see you in another one.